Hey guys, Britt here. Welcome to End Times Bible Prophecy. Make sure to hit the subscribe, like, share, and restack buttons. Well, another Great Depression is knocking on our door. In fact, it's already here. So today we're going to look at what's happening in the world. First, we're going to talk about what happened during the Great Depression. What did that look like? So therefore, what we expect to see if we saw a repeat of the Great Depression. Then we're going to look at what we see in the world today and how it aligns with what happened back then. But first, I want to turn your attention to this right here. So this is on brittgillette.substack.com. If you're not signed up to that, you may have missed this. This is an article that went out yesterday. It's titled, "Are We in the Time of the Lord's Return?" Well, the Bible says yes. And this goes through the signs that Jesus and the prophets said to look for that indicate the nearness of his return. So if you missed that, didn't get a chance to see that, make sure to head over to brittgillette.substack.com. Now, normally I put these articles out on Tuesday. I do a Monday video. This week it's reversed. Why is that? Well, it's not a normal thing. God willing, we'll be back on track next week with the same Monday video, Tuesday article. But I'm a big Green Bay Packer fan. And so is my neighbor. And Sunday we were at church and he said, "Hey, you want to come over and watch the Packer game after church?" And I didn't know it was on TV. So everything I had planned for that afternoon just sort of went out the window and put me behind to start the week. But every once in a while you've got to relax and do that sort of thing. So we watched the Packers. They won. That's good. Sorry if you're a Jacksonville fan. That's who they played on Sunday. But again, God willing, next week's schedule will be back to normal. We'll have Monday video, Tuesday article, and then videos on Wednesday and Friday as well. So back to what we're talking about. Another Great Depression is knocking on the door. So at least we have to ask, what was the Great Depression like? What led to the Great Depression? How did that play out? Well, it started with a credit bubble being blown by central bank policies. So we had the creation of the Federal Reserve about 15 years before the Great Depression came into play, and that led to loose credit conditions, easy lending, and that blew a giant credit bubble known as the Roaring Twenties. So we saw a massively overvalued stock market. We saw inflated property values in many places around the United States and around the world. And so when those bubbles burst, when that credit got defaulted on, so for instance, in the stock market, people borrowed dollars in order to buy stocks and speculate in the stock market. When those stocks went down, their loans got called and they couldn't repay them. Well, when you default on debt, that currency effectively disappears. It shrinks the currency supply. And during the Great Depression, we saw the currency supply, the number of dollars in circulation, decrease by 33%. So a third of the dollars just disappeared as a result of these debt defaults. And of course, that makes dollars hard to come by, and people who need them in order to pay back their debt payments find them harder to come by, and they begin to default. And that's what's known as a deflationary spiral. You have a default on debt that then circles around and it causes bankruptcies, which cause job losses, which cause more credit defaults, and it goes around until the free market reaches an equilibrium and the economy begins to grow again. So we would expect to see deflation in a deflationary spiral like that. So all of the talk we have around the world of inflation, 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 and it's true, we've had inflation, but the idea that we're going to see that inflation just roar ahead infinitely is incorrect, because eventually you reach a point where people are no longer able to pay back the debt that they have because they've taken on too much debt. and all the income they earn is going to pay for basic survival. And if all of your income is going to groceries and rent, well, you don't have disposable income to buy cars and refrigerators and all the products and services that are offered in a well-functioning economy. And so then those businesses start to trim employees who then can't make their debt payments and they default on them, and we see this deflationary spiral go into play. So what are we seeing right now in the world? Well, let's start with this right here. So this is from Twitter. It says, with inflation crossing below 2% in France and Spain, markets now predict an 80% chance the European Central Bank will cut interest rates in October. So again, they're still seeing inflation in France and Spain, but it's decelerating. It's going downward at a level that the central banks don't want, because remember, our current monetary system is created. It's a big Ponzi scheme. They need ever greater amounts of debt to be taken on. And the moment that doesn't happen, the whole thing falls apart. So they want inflation, but it reaches a point where, well, they can't get it no matter how hard they try. And so we're seeing France and Spain, so these are the 7th and 15th largest economies in the world, are seeing a deceleration of inflation. That should be good, right? Well, it's good as long as you have income, because we don't want to see higher prices. But if you have no income, well, it doesn't matter what the prices are, and that's where we're headed. So we see the same thing in the UK, which again, the UK is the 6th largest economy in the world. Inflation falls sharply to 1.7%, below the Bank of England's target for the first time in 3 years. So that's a sign of a slowing economy heading into this global depression. See the same thing from CNBC in Germany. Again, the 3rd largest economy in the world. German inflation drops to 1.8% in September, below expectations. Now, it's probably a bit higher in all of these instances because the government lies. They give us fake statistics. But the fake statistics are still declining, right? So that tells us we're headed towards zero eventually, and then this deflationary spiral for a short time. We see the same thing in China. China's consumer inflation cools in September. Purchasers' pricing index deflation deepens. So that's the prices that, for the raw inputs that are going into products that are being made, we're seeing those prices decline. We talked about steel prices in China are dropping rapidly, just as we saw during the Great Recession a little over 15 years ago. So we're seeing the signs. Again, China's the 2nd largest economy in the world. We're seeing the signs all throughout the world that we're in a deflationary period in many countries. So we looked at this before. China faces worst deflationary streak since 1999. And we looked at this article where they said young Chinese are retiring, right? They're retiring to the countryside as China's unemployment woes great. So that's what we saw during the Great Depression. We saw people going back to the farm. People who worked in the urban areas went back to the family farm because there were no jobs in the urban centers. We're seeing the same thing happen in China. They may call it retiring, but really it's moving back with mom and dad. That's what they really mean to be saying. It's setting up shop in mom and dad's basement, not living with mom and dad, but living off of mom and dad because the young people don't have the income to support themselves. So that's what's happening in China. They're in full-bore throes of deflation in China right now. Again, we see this in Germany, where the economy is shrinking. We've seen Volkswagen has announced the closure of several plants for the first time in their history in Germany. We're seeing deflation take hold in Germany, again, the third largest economy in the world. So we're seeing the second in China, the third in Germany. Mentioned the UK is the sixth largest economy. So we're seeing this deflation take hold in all of these economies. How about the number one economy in the world, the United States? We're not there yet, but we're seeing those signs. So we looked at this before. This is from back in July from CNN. 39% of Americans worry they can't pay the bills. To put that in perspective, I believe this hit a peak of 35% back in the height of the great financial crisis. So this is the worst this has been in quite some time. And there's no wonder that people are having a problem paying the bills because of the inflation, the consumer price inflation that we've experienced in the past 4 years, plus this. So this is from the Federal Reserve Bank of St. Louis. It's personal interest payments in billions of dollars. And look at how this has changed since pre-pandemic. It's gone from $350 billion to $557 billion today. This massive upward trend, that's just the interest that people are paying on credit cards, auto loans, home mortgages, whatever debt they're taking out. And of course, the more that goes toward interest, the less can be spent on goods and services in the general economy. And so what would we expect to see as a result of this spike in interest payments, personal interest payments, and how much of a person's budget that's taking up? Well, we would expect to see more defaults, and that's what we're beginning to see. So we had this also from the Federal Reserve Bank of St. Louis. The delinquency rate on credit card loans. So we see pre-pandemic, that was at 2.66%. We're at 3.25% right now, and the trend is upward. We're nowhere near great financial crisis levels at this point. But my guess is that's exactly where we're headed. So we're seeing defaults start to take place. But keep in mind, the stock market's at an all-time high. Unemployment numbers are still relatively low. As we see the market crash and we see the unemployment numbers go up, we would expect this default rate to go up as well. And it's all, again, a spiral that takes place. How about this right here? So this is from Twitter, from the Kobayashi letter. It says, a record 87% of Americans now believe it's a bad time to buy a home, more than double the 2008 peak. So if you recall, in 2008, the great financial crisis, many people believe the catalyst for that was subprime mortgages and overinflated home values, again, from this credit bubble that was blown, that made the value of homes very unaffordable. Here they're saying, well, and twice as many people say it's a bad time to buy a home as during the peak of the bubble that led to the great financial crisis. It says, in fact, even when mortgage rates hit a whopping 18% in the early 1980s, sentiment was not as bad as it is now. In the 1980s, this metric peaked at 79%, 8 percentage points below current levels. This is by far the most pessimistic housing market sentiment in history. So homes have become unaffordable for all those who don't have, that aren't in the wealthy tiers, right? Unless you have enough cash on hand to just go buy a house. Well, generally, if you're working a regular job, you're probably unable to buy a home, even more so than you were just a few years ago. A few years ago, you may have been unable to buy a home, but it's getting even worse. We also see this from Bravos research. It says buying conditions have collapsed to levels never seen going back to 1960. Similar levels have always ended in recession, so we see nothing like this on record. Again, go back to the early 80s when we just read buying conditions were estimated or sentiment was near the levels it is now. But it's lower than that. And all of these coincide with these gray lines are recessions that took place. And so we would expect to see fewer homes being sold, and that's what we're seeing. At this from Andrew Lokanoff, he says September's existing home sales fell to its lowest since 2002, 3.5% or 2010, 3.5% year over year. And U.S. home sales are on track for their worst year since 1995. Buying a home has never been less affordable. And all we have to do is look around and we can see that. It's very clear how exorbitant the prices are, plus with the interest rates where they are. It's very difficult to buy a home. I believe we've looked in the past before at the median house prices 8 times the median income. It was 6.7 at the height of the housing bubble that preceded the great financial crisis. So this is the most overvalued homes have been in modern times in the United States. How about this from Bravo's research? It says high rates are really putting pressure on small businesses. This is worse than September 2007, right before the financial crisis. Small businesses are responsible for the overwhelming majority of jobs and employment here in the United States. And so if those small businesses are put under pressure, that's a bad sign for what's coming in the economy. And how about this? This is from Global Markets Investors. It says U.S. companies have almost ceased hiring. The hiring rate fell to 3.3% in August, matching the lowest level since 2013, excluding COVID. The largest declines in hiring have been reported in retail trade, transportation, and warehousing. The U.S. job market continues to weaken. So guys, that's what we would expect to see heading into a deflationary decline, which is exactly what we're going to see. Again, we see the stock market at record levels of overvaluation. We talked about that in a video at the end of last week. 1929 was less overvalued than we are right now, as was the dot-com bubble, less overvalued than where we are right now with U.S. stock markets indices. So we're heading for a bubble burst, and when that bubble burst, that decline in stocks is going to lead to ripple effects throughout the economy as people have less cash available. It will lead to indirectly a decrease in the currency supply as that value gets wiped out, as the value of those stocks gets wiped out from people's personal wealth. And then they feel less inclined to spend. And then we've seen, well, we're at supposedly near record levels of lows of unemployment, but we're seeing hiring begin to slow down, and we're going to see many of those jobs, we're going to see massive job losses, just as we saw during the great financial crisis. Those can come very quickly. In a matter of mere months, we could see just a stacking of job losses, unfortunately. And then, of course, when people lose their jobs, they're unable to meet these massive debt obligations that have been piled up. They're unable to meet those massive interest payments that we've seen are at record levels. And so as they default on auto loans, credit cards, mortgages, that will actually shrink the currency supply, put us in this deflationary spiral that leads to further corporate bankruptcies, small business bankruptcies, more job layoffs, and more of the same until we reach that market equilibrium where the economy begins to grow again. And guys, there's something else we're seeing. Back in the Great Depression, if you remember, there was something called the Smoot-Hawley Tariff Act signed in 1930, really in response to the Great Depression and this idea, while people are unemployed, they're losing their jobs to those overseas. So tariff barriers were erected to keep those jobs domestically. And we saw a trade war break out globally as local politicians, in order to please their constituents, say, we can't have these jobs here at home going overseas, so we're going to put these trade barriers in effect. Well, we're seeing this right here. So this is from CNBC. Just a few days ago, it says German finance minister warns of retaliation if U.S. kicks off trade war. And we've seen the same things with China and other countries talk of raising tariffs, ending free trade agreements. Guys, for national security reasons, we may want to institute tariffs and make sure that we are helping domestic industries that are needed for national security concerns. But overall, economically, in a vacuum, erecting trade barriers is a bad idea. It leads to less economic growth rather than more economic growth. And so this is part of what led to the Great Depression, made the Great Depression worse. We're seeing the same things start to take place. We're seeing the same, the politicians following the same playbook that they have in the past. So we shouldn't expect a different outcome. We should expect to see the same outcome. However, again, I think that they will follow a different path in the future as we see the world just in the grips of this deflationary spiral and all of the job losses and the discomfort that that's going to create. We're going to see the politicians say, well, we can't have this. We need to, people can't be homeless, so let's send them stimulus checks to make their rent payment or make their mortgage payment, or we can have moratoriums as we did during the pandemic. And people shouldn't have to pay their student loans back. Groceries are outrageous, so we should send grocery stimulus checks. So the governments of the world will simply print currency and hand it out to their citizens in order to avoid social unrest, essentially, and try to turn around this deflationary spiral. Eventually, they'll print enough that it appears to work and things will seem to get better. But to do that, they'll have to overdo it. They'll overprint, and we'll end up with hyperinflation on the other side of this. So we're looking at, really, again, the greatest financial crisis in history. We're on the cusp of that. I believe we're in a global depression right now. The United States it appears, going to be the last major economy to enter into that. And of course, that will have the biggest effect since the United States is the largest economy in the world. And we're going to see this deflation take hold for 12 to 18 months until enough handouts are created to turn it around and cause massive inflation on the other side. And guys, somewhere in that process, probably in the deflation part, they're going to roll out the central bank digital currency, the tokenized assets, the digital IDs. That will be the solution to the broken system, and people will clamor for it. And so this is all setting us up for a massive crisis that leads to the rollout of this new system. And it's a system that's indistinguishable in capability and function from the mark of the beast system. With it, government will have all control over every buy-sell transaction, just as we read about in Revelation chapter 13. So this is something to keep our eyes on. Again, that won't be the mark of the beast system. That occurs at the midpoint of the tribulation period. But we would expect to see the system being put in place before we get to the tribulation period and the midpoint of the tribulation period, because this stuff doesn't just appear out of nowhere. The Antichrist and the false prophet, it'll already be there for them to just flip a switch and implement that mark of the beast system. Guys, we're seeing the pieces being put in place right now, right before our eyes. Again, we shouldn't be filled with fear over this. Yes, you should have concern, and we should be fighting back against bad policies and bad ideas and government assaults on freedom and liberty. But know that Christ has already won the victory. We're not to live in fear. And we should be using this time as an opportunity to evangelize to a lost and dying world. A lost and dying world that in many cases, well, in all cases except those who have put their faith in Jesus Christ, they've built their lives upon shifting sand, whether it's the economy or a career, whatever it may be. They've built their lives on shifting sand, and there is a storm coming that is going to wipe out so many lives in that respect. Spiritually, we need to be there ready to share the good news and share the hope that we have in Jesus Christ with those who are hit hardest by this. So guys, be prepared, be joyful as we go forward. God chose to put us here in this day and time, right now, for this very reason. We shouldn't be, again, fearful or afraid of what's coming. We should be energized and ready to go out and do the work that the Lord has given us. Go out and to make disciples of all nations. This is a perfect opportunity to share the hope you have in Jesus Christ. So I hope in today and in the days ahead, whatever days we may have left, that you make sure that you're doing that with everyone you encounter. Every opportunity you receive, take advantage of it, guys, because who knows how much time we have left. So let me know what you think. Leave your comments below. Make sure to hit the like, share, and subscribe buttons. God willing, I will see you on Wednesday, which is tomorrow. Talk to you then. Bye. If you want to learn more about the end times and Bible prophecy, make sure to visit my Substack at brittgillette.substack.com. There you'll find my latest videos and articles, as well as notes, where I share the latest news headlines, the articles I'm reading, and the videos I'm watching. Subscribe for free, and each new post on Substack will be sent directly to your email. Just scroll to the bottom of the homepage and hit the subscribe button. As an added bonus, your first welcome email will include a link to a copy of my free ebook, 7 Signs of the End Times. Also, make sure to check out all of my books. Just look up Britt Gillette on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Apple iBooks, Google Books, Kobo, or anywhere books are sold. Thanks for watching today, and until next time, keep your eyes fixed on Jesus, the author and perfecter of our faith.